Well, the Colt's a great tool from the standpoint of once you get kids past the initial strength conditioning aspect of it and the athletic development, now you can start getting into specifics. And it's applicable to a lot of different sports, but it fits into getting the connection between eye and hand, making contact, whether it's football, whether it's basketball, from the standpoint of teaching these kids hand placement. And when you spend so much time on hip and ankle development as far as mobility-wise, body positioning, height of the athlete, the first step height, the length of the first step, but once they make contact, what do they do with it? It's not just a pad, it's a pad with arms, and it makes it very realistic where you can progress these kids in the step-by-step progressions you're going to do to get around somebody, avoiding contact points, hand placement, body positioning, all those things come into play. And so it really plays a huge asset in getting what you're teaching them from a physical development standpoint and using those same cues in a realistic component of having a pad with arms and letting them work it and use it. And so it's, I view it as a huge asset. O-line for sure, D-line for sure, linebacker for sure. I mean, the game of football today is of just lining up and playing smash mouth are done. Every play of football has got movement to it, and kids got to understand how to make contact with their hands and ride a player, hand placement, body positioning. Once they get moving, how do they avoid the hands and get past them? Same thing with a linebacker. The concept of linebackers being a backside linebacker, slow playing when somebody's counting, coming out with them. How do they take on the block? Is it inside out? Is it outside in? Same thing with DBs. If they're coming up to, if they're playing press coverage and you got a receiver coming off the line, how can they play press correctly? So I think it's very applicable to a lot of positions in football. Well, I'll answer that question this way. A lot of people come in and they ask me about training on treadmills. And I tell them, well, when a football field starts to move, the whole floor in here will move. So the game of football is every sport you play, it's active, it involves motion. So to make it as realistic as you can, to get the carryover to what you want them to do on the field, they got to be able to do it against something that's moving, something stable. It may be a place to start, but once you get past that, they've got to be able to do it against something that you would view as live. Absolutely. Well, the technique standpoint, when you're talking about especially offensive and defensive linemen and even linebackers, when you're taking on a block, where do you put your hands? You're always talking about getting the inside position. So the inside position and the low pads win. So that initial contact at speed of where to place their hands inside, getting the feel of getting inside the arms on the breastplate. And once they do that, getting them to understand that my feet are going to follow my hands. So once I make contact, having the arms available on the pad for them to, at speed, how do I defeat the block with the arms being there? It's a great tool to use. Well, I think there's a lot more programs out there today that are starting to realize that the more you just stand there and beat on each other, kids don't last. I mean, when you look at the total sum of everything they're doing, of constantly smashing in practice, then you've got scrimmages, then you've got games, and coming back to practice, that wear and tear starts to wear kids down. So that being able to have a tool that you can rep live and not beat up the person that's doing the rep or the person that's holding the pad, I think is a huge asset from being able to develop the violence of doing something live and not getting beat up physically, and getting kids the concept of reps. Reps are plural. So a kid's not going to have a perfect rep first time. It may not happen to the 50th time, but once it's there, you're always able to do things at speed and stay healthy. And I think that's a huge selling point in using something like this. Well, the biggest thing when you're talking about basketball, if you're going to talk about post guys, well, post guys are going to have their back to the net. They're going to be in the paint. Someone's always going to have pressure on the side. Well, how do they hook and step around? When you have something realistic with the arms there, as you come through, the arm placement, they got to be able to get down below their arms. Guys are going to be guarding. They're going to have their hand on their upper back to feel the hip height to drop, get that drop step, and defeat them around, I think is huge. And there again, being able to stand behind them and make that realistic pressure of what they're feeling with the arms there again is very realistic. When you take a perimeter player that's on the perimeter and has to do a crossover move to get into the paint or drive, there again, just having somebody stand there with a pad and step into them and smash them Well, yeah, it's going to teach them how to take on contact, how to keep control of the ball. But there again, it's unrealistic because those guys are going to step into them with their hips, but you still have to deal with their arms. So it's another component to make it more realistic of what they're going to feel. So it's kind of like a Mountain Dew commercial. When they're playing it live and it's actually going on in the game, been there, done that. So they felt it, they know what it's like, and they're getting that same feel every rep they take. And the carryover you're going to get from that is just that. It's going to be live, and you're going to get a lot of carryover from it. Absolutely, because you know all your football players, especially at the high school level, it's not prototype. You're not going to play against it. You know, every guy you play against isn't going to be 6'5", 300. You know, you're going to have kids that are 5'8", some kids that are 5'9", some that are 6'2". So being able to adjust that pad height, and you may have a shorter D lineman. Let's say you got a D lineman that's 5'10", 5'11", and he's playing against guys that are 6'1", 6'2". Well, allowing him to feel that height difference and how to adjust to that and still feel that inside hand position and leverage and how to defeat that and get off. There again, you're just making it very realistic for them to feel so that when they get into live action, they've been through it and they understand what it feels like. Absolutely. I mean, there again, when you're dealing with youth levels, everything's going to have progressions. It doesn't make a difference if you're a youth level or a professional athlete. You're going to still have progressions to everything you do. So being able to start with a pad like that you can still, you just focusing on hand placement. So it can be like your typical hand shield. But it's multi-purpose now because you can start with that same feel, that same concept. Now add in the fact that they're going to make hand contact, run their feet. Now how do you deal with the arms? How do you defeat the block and go through it? So there again, when you deal with youth level kids, it's the first time in pads. It's the first time having a helmet on. They don't know half the time whether they're foot or horseback. So you're being able to get these kids to have reps over and over and over and over again and not lose that kid because they're getting beat up. And they go home like, well, I don't really know if I like football because it's so much contact and I'm sore and I don't feel good. Well, now they can get as many reps as you want and not beat each other up and make it as realistic as you can. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to expose them to contact at some point, but you got to limit that, especially at that level. So I think it's got a huge asset at the youth level. Well, it's like anything. The first time you do something, you feel it first. You get an idea of it, and once you get more comfortable with it, the speed of it, the violence of it, all those things start to come with reps. And before you know it, they're right where you want them to do, and then it's ingrained, and that's the way it always is. So it's like anything. They got to get used to it at first, and once they get a feel for it, then they go, and it's all good.